very much, Otto. Yeah, so I'm really excited to be here. I had the chance yesterday to spend time at our booth and had dozens and dozens of really great conversation. There's really good energy here. I can tell it is a little bit early for some people, but that's all right. So what we're going to talk about a little bit is why open source matters, why contributing to open source matters. And for those of you who may not know who Hedera is, we are a layer 1. We are fully open source today, and we're really known for due to our Hashgraph consensus algorithm, we are known for being the lowest carbon impact blockchain. And we're also known for our governing council. So as you can see, we have a lot of well-recognized brands from across the planet. And when I first joined, I've been here about 6 months. When I first joined, I was really excited to be a part of Hedera, but I wondered how a governing council of 31 members was going to work. I'm like, holy crap, it's going to take a long time to get stuff done. And I've been very pleasantly surprised that that isn't the case. This group is actually really, really efficient, and our governance model was really, really effective. So, pardon me. Okay, there we go. So who am I? A little bit about my background. So I live in Durango, Colorado. It's a short 6.5-hour drive here from the venue. My passions are my wife and my teenage daughter. As you can tell, I'm also a big skier. I hope people are going to be going up to the after event in Breckenridge. I'll see you there. I'll be there for a couple days. I also, in the summer, I do a lot of four-wheeling up in the mountains, and I'm a bit of a wine geek. I spent 22 years in Silicon Valley, and I spent a lot of weekends up in Napa, so a little bit of a wine geek. I've also spent a lot of time in open source, and I've had the opportunity to work with well over 100 different organizations, helping them understand how to leverage open source for their organizations, from large entities like the Microsofts and IBMs and HPs of the world to dozens and dozens of startups, and also a lot of end users. I, with a partner, launched and ran the being a wine geek, I wanted to figure out how I could write off my wine purchases legitimately as business expense. So a buddy and I invited some friends to Napa, and we gave this weekend event a really prestigious name called the Open Source Think Tank. So we were up there, and we had a great time, great conversations. We were able to write off our wine purchases and decide, hey, next year let's do it a little bit bigger. So essentially for 10 years, we invited 120 of the top open source thought leaders from around the world to join us. And what we found out is, hey, we can write off our wine, make a little bit of money, but most importantly, have just awesome conversations with some of the smartest people in open source. And I learned a tremendous amount from those 10 years. Again, I've had an opportunity to work with well over 100 clients. One of those, the MBCI there stands for Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians. That was one of the more unusual open source engagements I had. So they made a whole bunch of money from their casino and resort operations. Someone told them about open source, and they decided, we want to diversify. So we actually put an investment portfolio together, how to invest in open source software and hardware, and we got to present to the chiefs of the tribal council. And that was really fun engagement. These are some of the sharpest people I have ever met. The point being is that I've seen a lot from large to small. I've seen a lot of what works and what hasn't worked, and then hopefully bringing some of that to Hedera and to the stage today. So we are talking about why contributing to open source matters, or why should you open source stuff, right? And hopefully at the end, this will give you a bit of an idea of why it's actually important. So let's talk about why it actually does matter. Probably aware that open source really is the foundation for virtually every single technology invention since the internet has come along. The internet, cloud computing, AI, and of course, DLT. So I'm assuming that all of you are actually consuming open source, you're building your solutions on top of open source, but are you actually contributing, are you giving back? So we're going to talk about why that's important. That first number, last year, GitHub exceeded 100 million developers on their platform. That's a lot of people. They also had 98 million new projects last year, and today they have a total of over 420 million. It's important to keep in mind, not all open source is done on GitHub. So this is the largest portion, but it also happens elsewhere. So these numbers are even actually bigger. They had 4.5 billion code contributions to their projects. Now, what's important to take away from these numbers are the first and the third numbers. Right? So 100 million developers, but over 420 million projects. So what that actually tells us is there's far more demand for developer mindshare than actually exists out there. That makes it a little bit tough to do what we want to do. So that's something we have to pay attention to, and that equation is not going to change for the near future. Whoa, that's interesting. I didn't put that animation in. Just happened. All right, so although Hedera is not solely about the enterprise, we are focused on the enterprise, but we also had other types of use cases like karate combat and Galaxy. And open source is, of course, not all about the enterprise. But that's what we're going to talk about, or I'm going to talk about. It's really an easy way to communicate the impact of open source today. So why does the enterprise care about open source? Really, there's three core reasons. It's innovation, it's cost, and it's their developer and the greater developer community. So I got to work with a large bank in the UK a few years ago, and they were considering deploying a logging and monitoring application in analytics. Not that sexy, but everybody has one, right? And so they were looking at one open source solution called Elastic and 3 different proprietary solutions. At the end of the day, they selected the open source solution, Elastic. The reason they did so initially was for cost reasons. It was more cost effective than the proprietary software. But what they really found out is that being a part of a huge, active, innovative community that's evolving this software on a continual basis had huge advantages. And so they were able to deploy this software, and they found out it didn't quite exactly meet all their needs. So their developer community jumped on board, and they began actually customizing this software because they could. They gave some of those contributions back, some they didn't. But what they noticed after a couple of years of this, not only did it work, but that group that was responsible had the lowest loss of developer rate, highest retention rate in the whole bank. And so what they realized is their developers wanted to work on the software. And this is one of the key reasons for enterprises to adopt open source. Because you know what, it's not really cool to work in a large bank. Sorry, Ian. It's not. And so enterprises are investing in open source as a way to lower costs, drive innovation, and bring to them the best developer community. Okay? So some of the data points around enterprise adoption, 30%, which is actually a really big number, and it's growing all the time, have OSPOs. That's open source program offices. So they invest millions in creating these offices. They take open source very seriously. It's strategic to them. Right? And so an OSPO is typically centered or housed in their engineering group, but it also has roles from people participate from HR and procurement and security and other functions from around the bank or that enterprise. And the reason they're doing this is because they need to run that software and manage it as effectively and as efficiently as possible. And part of that reason is today the average enterprise is using over 20,000 different open source components, and some far more than that. And what they care about really is making sure that they're secure and that the software that they consume is supportable, that there's a community around it. And so they need to have this centralized organization to help manage all of this, help engage with the external community. Because if you think about it, the ingestion model, the software ingestion model by a large bank is really complicated, right? They build their own software, they grab stuff down from the internet, they buy software from startups, they buy software from large enterprises. People don't like SAP, people don't realize over 80% of SAP is built on open source. And they work with large systems integrators who contribute open source. So they have this open source software coming at them from all different angles. And if you look at one security issue, anybody familiar with Log4j about 4 years ago? So Log4j is a fairly commonly used library, right? And after a vulnerability was discovered, in the first 3 days post that vulnerability, there were 850,000 attacks on enterprises across the planet, right? Log4j is only the 21st most widely used open source library. And today, well, it's about 6 months ago I saw the last stat, 17% of Log4j libraries that are downloaded are of the unremediated version. All right? So that's why the enterprise needs to figure out how to manage the open source that they're consuming really effectively. Right? And how many of you are passionate about documenting the software you write? Right? How many of you just love documentation? You're a unicorn. That's not usual, right? Most developers are at best ambivalent about it, right? When the enterprise gets involved in open source projects, they actually encourage their contributors, their developers, to do documentation because they want good documentation for themselves. So I always point this out as a reason why we want to engage with the enterprise community, because their developers will help you with your documentation. All right, so why does this matter to you? The whole reason behind creating an open source community or your own open source ecosystem, and I've seen this so many times when it's done well, is collaboration in your community will drive revenue for you. It can drive new products, new features. It can bring you into new geographies. You'll get feedback on your business model, right? Getting your partners and your customers involved in your own open source ecosystem has huge advantages, right? You're building something that's really sticky. You get your customers involved in your ecosystem. They don't want to leave. They want to be a part of the organization. They will tell you what's working, what's not working. They will tell you if they like your business model. They will help you with your product roadmap. And again, I've seen this work many times over the years. I've also seen it not work, but it can. Now, there's a great example of this ecosystem I have here. It's called finos.org. It's called the FinTech Open Source Foundation. So this organization was created about 6 years ago for financial services to some of the most conservative enterprises on the planet to open source more software. And so that's what they've done over the last 6 years. And you have today over 40 of the largest financial institutions on the planet, from BlackRock, MasterCard, Visa, Fidelity, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, on and on and on, that are members of this foundation. And the whole idea is, one, open source their software, share innovation, drive innovation, share costs, and you have you have vendors that are a part of this community that are open sourcing their software to all these banks. So it's a great example. If you ever want to see an example of how this ecosystem can work really well for all of us, that's a good one. So one absolutely key lesson that I've learned and that I coach when I'm talking to them about helping to open source their software or create an open source community, it's really the most successful open source projects appeal to the self-interests of their community and who they want to be a member of their community, right? Are you people participating in your community because they want to build cool stuff? Are they there because they want to bring cool stuff back to their employer? Are they there because they want to make money, or a combination of all of that? Figure that out, right? Figure that. Why are partners there? Why are do other dApps want to potentially be a part of our community? Why do our customers want to be, and then appeal to that self-interest, right? If it's an enterprise, help them understand that by participating, they can make your stuff more secure. If it's another app vendor, help them understand how they can make money from being a part of your community. Appeal to their self-interest. There's nothing wrong with that, right? So this is a quick snapshot. I know it's a really ugly eye chart up there, but this represents our own ecosystem of communities, how they're interrelated. These are different projects within our stack. When you get online, we can use a company called Bitergia is building these tools for us. You can actually drill down. It's 100% interactive in real time, and you can see which projects are growing, which aren't, how they're connected to other projects. But what I really wanted to show is this is the Guardian platform, and so this is one of our projects. It's a really comprehensive policy workflow engine that you can build sophisticated ESG apps with. And when I came on board and I started getting information like this about our own communities, I love this. This is awesome. This is what we want to do. It's got 89 different contributors. It's got 24 organizations. It's got thousands and thousands of contributions. It's a great start for us. This is a platform that has a whole bunch of use cases in production. We've got vendors, partners, customers that are participating in this community. It's a great start, a great example. It's not big enough. We need it to be bigger. Hopefully, if I do this in a couple of years, these numbers are 200%, 300%. But this is exactly what you want one of your projects to look like. So, how do you actually make this happen? Well, the first part is open source something that matters to someone else, not to you, right? That's great, open source your stuff, but make sure that you're also open sourcing something that matters to your audience. Because if you don't, it's a non-starter. Make it easy to use. I can't stress this enough. And then when you thought you've made it really easy to use, make it easier. I worked with one company actually in Colorado years ago, and it took 4 hours for people to download the software, configure it, before they could actually start doing something with it. And they wondered why they didn't have a lot of adoption, right? So they worked really, really, really hard, and they got that down to 28 minutes. And they saw a 600% increase in the uptake of their software. So that's what I mean. Make it easy, make it simple to use. And this is really important. Make sure there is value at no cost forever in your community. Make sure there is something that you are open sourcing, even your partners are open sourcing, that is at no cost. Somebody can just download it, play with it, and it has value, it does something for them. If everything you open source is tied to something that costs money, that's a bait and switch. And your customers will figure that out really quickly. So that's important. Have something, have a nugget of what you're open sourcing that will have value and not at cost. Okay? And it's hard to do this right. It's actually hard. I usually tell people it's going to take a lot of effort, and even if you execute well, it's going to take probably a couple years to do it right. But it is absolutely well worth it. So, if you want to learn more about who we are, we're actually right around the corner at booth 105. Love for you to come and join us and ask questions. We don't have a lot of time for questions here. And then come open source with Hedera. So, I've got 1 minute. I've got one last question. I want to see if anyone here knows their open source history. So, does anybody know who this man is? RMS. And do you know what his persona is that he's showing you right here? This is Saint Ganusius. And Saint Ganusius, so Richard Stallman, actually, we all think of Linux as being invented by Linus Torvalds and others. But I've seen him make developers cry because they didn't call it GNU Linux. So Linux is a kernel, GNU is the actual operating system, and RMS invented GNU Linux. But he is the founder of kind of the whole open source movement. So, again, hopefully some of you will come and open source with Hedera. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks. All right.
Very much, Andrew. That was great. Our next talk will be in just a couple of minutes, so I don't know if you want to do questions.
I think we have 18 seconds. So
we might have time for 1 or 2 questions.
We are right around the corner at 105, at booth 105, and I am happy to answer questions.
Right around the corner for any questions.
Thanks for your attention.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.